Um, we're now going live on Facebook and YouTube, and everyone is here on Zoom. Welcome. Gordon Skinner is our 18th guest, and we're really excited, and I'm feeling dangerously casual about this discussion with Gordon today, so something will probably go wrong. But, you know, shutting down a few things on the monitor here. So Gordon, this is the Tuning Fork, and you've been a regular attendee and participant over the past 6 months. Thank you for being with us. And, you know, we do have a kind of structure where you and I will have a conversation for about 10 minutes or so, perhaps longer, depending how much we like each other. And then we'll go into your work a bit. And then after about 1 hour's time from now, about 4:05, I'm sort of guessing, we can invite others to participate, comment, make questions, and throw tomatoes. So we may get a few tomatoes in the meantime, hopefully. You're looking really great today, Gordon. Is that because you're a professional camera person and you have all the skills of television production in your studio at home?
No, I mean, actually, I was ambivalent. I just don't know anymore.
Oh yeah, but not knowing is okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at all the friends that are here. I don't know if you can see that, Gordon, but
yeah, I can see some are like real eager. You know, I won't mention some of those who have their hand on their chin and looking very apprehensive. You know,
that would be Robin.
That would be Robin.
Yeah.
And then others who don't want to be associated, guilt by association, so they block their screen, such as Susan Pearlstein, Maria Congiano. But you know, other than that,
yeah. Don't you feel like you're just wallpaper in some person's home?
No, I actually feel like I'm on some version of This Is Your Life, and you're playing Groucho.
Well, yeah, I'm flattered, and I'm not sure I want to belong in the club that would accept me anyway.
Well, that's his line. I'm not sure I want to be a member of any organization that would have me as a member.
Well, count yourself out.
Thank you.
You'll feel more comfortable.
Right.
Hey, you see, there's Emily Harris is our host here, co-host with me, and yeah, hey, and there she is on 2 cameras. How about that? Yeah, just so we give folks a little context of the process, you know, of this sort of kind of program, and the way we like to do things, even when we're making films. Sometimes we have a second camera, right, Gordon? A second camera, maybe even shooting us making the film. Right. So first of all, I wanted to sort of say thanks to everyone for tuning in and for their, you know, precious attention and time today. It's our 18th show. Yeah. And it's still the 18th show, right? Yeah. So the Tuning Fork, just to appraise people a little bit, appraise. We're here really as a community that maybe had nothing better to do. But, you know, on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., we've been getting together since September. And our kickoff show was with Ann Waldman. Gordon has been here for, I think, 16 out of 18 shows. Ron Smith, about the same. Sally Harris, been with us frequently, and I think only maybe once or twice also, not here. Ron Daniels out in Mackinac, northern Minnesota.
No, Michigan.
Northern Michigan. That's my Michigans.
Yes. UP, man, we're Upers up here.
Right.
They call us Upers. I don't know why, but it fits.
If the shoe fits, on. Okay. Anyway, so it's a little bit casual, and we sort of run things a little bit like a dinner party where we have a guest, and so we're sort of comfortable here in this sort of resonance of the tuning fork. The metaphor of the tuning fork, of course, is that we sort of tune in to, in this context, cultural activism and the sublime sensations today emanating from Mr. Gordon Skinner in Brooklyn. And thanks again, Gordon. So we were talking the other day, Gordon, about like what it was like in the 70s, and it's kind of interesting to visit that period together. I think there's perhaps some relevancy today with what's going on the streets. Although on the streets today is different kind of chaos. Back in the 70s, which we can sort of reference a little bit as a kind of I was thinking about it, Gordon, that cultural activism, those days, was a kind of something that was like challenging the establishment. And the idea of creating an institute for Emily and I perhaps is to sort of, not necessarily challenge the establishment, but to establish the challenging. We have elevated what used to be something perhaps a little bit aberrant from most social behavior, artists doing things on the streets, taking over city infrastructures, perhaps creating what might be considered interventions and disruptions.
Well, in response to that, what I would say is, first I want to acknowledge, all of my friends who are here, and, really express my profound appreciation. I'm long on gratitude, just short on time. But, I've always said, if you want to know where you are, look at the causes that you made to get there. And if you want to know where you're going, look at what you're doing right now. And in referencing the 70s, I'm going to shout out a couple of people, that were and still are and have created institutions that are culturally active, that are cultural activism centers, namely Robin Hirsch and Cornelia Street Cafe, Susan Pearlstein and Elder Share the Arts. These institutions and these individuals have had an indelible impact on my life, and their work really set the stage not only for myself as an individual, but also New York City. And in a lot of ways, the activism that you're talking about, that you're speaking about, found a lot of that found its places, certainly within, those hollowed halls of, the famed Cornelia Street Cafe, and certainly, the work that, Susan was doing with Elder Share the Arts, actually integrating the arts as a vehicle for improving the quality of life of our aging population. And I wonder, where we are going to be in the future now that these institutions are not, in the same, the word machination wants to come to mind, but it's not that. They're not existing in the way they used to. And I'm very greatly concerned that there aren't institutions that are stepping up to either stand on their shoulders or to supplant them.
What comes to mind, Gordon?
What comes to mind is institutions currently?
That you're concerned about?
I'm concerned that there aren't any, that there are very few, and maybe that has to do with the time, maybe it has to do with where we are as a society. Maybe it has to do with where we're going.
Yeah. Talked about the living theater a little bit and your experiences from that time, because what kind of age do you think you might have been around then?
Well, the Living Theater definitely was a theater that would age you.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a surreal
Yeah.
environment.
right. Yeah, yeah,
But I mean, I think when we were talking about it and how I, got there and what was going on at that particular time, it was amazing just, how radical they were. It was almost in their sleep. It was their nature. The play that I was in, Echoes of Justice, the Larry Davis story, was very political. It actually, made the case that New York City police officers, law enforcement writ large, including prosecutors, were actually uh, they were recruiting young men of color to actually sell drugs for them. Uh,
right.
and we went into preview the night of the LA uprising in response to the Rodney King verdict.
Right.
And we opened the night when Giuliani, shut down New York City and sent the tanks, the police tanks, through the East Village and the Lower East Side.
It sounds so surreal when you reflect on it, but we just saw something like that at the state capitol recently. So the nation's capital, rather.
It was, that's entirely different insofar as, that type
Yeah.
of insurrection,
Yeah.
that was an insurrection by the populace. This, what I'm talking about is, law enforcement,
Yes.
naked authoritarianism, that was just
Yeah.
blatant.
Gordon, when you were embodying that character in that play, what predisposed you to becoming an actor in that context, as sort of, channeling consciousness and activism in that sort of theatrical environment?
I mean, I would say that, I had the good fortune of, growing up in Chelsea, being formally trained at a very early age, at the Hudson Gill Theater, where I was both a child actor, and then I wound up, Gene Feist, with the Roundabout Theater, allowed me to be in, a couple of their productions as a 9-year-old. And yet around me, I had the likes of everyone from Bella Abzug and, David Rothenberg, were grooming me, even though prior to that, because of my father, I had, interactions with some major civil rights leaders of the time and other individuals who would go on to have a great impression on my life. So
What was your dad doing?
my father was a journalist initially. He was
Right.
a reporter first for the New York Post. He was actually the first African American reporter for the Post, then went to the New York Times, and then subsequently moved into broadcast journalism, where he created a television show.
Yeah. And was race a big topic at home, conversation? Was it something that you were embodying as a family? You were obviously supported in your pursuit of this kind of activism.
Well, I mean, look, being a person of color, who has the luxury of making, one's own determinations or decisions as to how I carry my life, that in and of itself is a radical statement.
Sure.
Saying that
Yeah.
saying that I am culturally, active and aware, that's a radical statement. So these are, this was just inbred in me. Wasn't something at the same time, while I own that, it wasn't, that I'm patting myself on the back or I was expecting anything about it. It was more, how do I look at life and how do I take, proactive responsibility for myself and my environment, and using the arts as one vehicle. And then, the other paths that my life would lead would all be other vehicles for how do we, help bring together an appreciation of one's identity in relationship to one's environment, and how do we celebrate, the beauty and the starkness that is part of this existence that we all share, in this urban jungle, if you will.
Okay, but when a society sort of imposes an identity onto a community, and it's individuals, then the self-image is something that's not necessarily one wants to inhabit.
Well, I mean, I definitely recognize the most dangerous place I can be is in your imagination.
Yeah, beautifully said, sadly, but accurate. I mean, in any case, in all contexts, because, most of us are always projecting our imagination onto what we perceive. So you've had training as well in meditation and mediation, arbitrating, and such, these kinds of activities, both internal and external, where internally you're examining yourself and analyzing yourself, and in some way penetrating and piercing whatever conditions and self images you may have been given by society, and then looking at society and communities and arbitrating. So you became sort of a real agent of transformation for groups of people in very critical situations. Where did you go as a mediator? Where were you?
Well, I mean, my mediation work, took me to the Middle East, took me to the Balkans shortly, 6 months after NATO had finished doing air sorties. So I was there attempting to facilitate dialogue, between these different disputing populations. Chile, subsequently, working in areas in Africa. And then, some of the more dangerous environments happen to be here in New York City or back in the United States. But you're referencing change, the only change that I can actually, be sure of making, and even that can be questionable, is my own internal change. I can't impose a change or tell anyone else to change. It's really not about that. But we can facilitate areas of dialogue and communication, establishing a commonality and appreciation for the fact that we all have the basic wants and needs, which are safety, security, access, self-determination, access. When I say access to food and water, these are things that we need. And so then the question becomes, how can I satisfy or secure the needs that I have, and not at the expense of your own?
Yeah. Gordon, you have this sort of fluid ability to move not only between mediums of expression, but also your work as a performer, educator, and mediator. I mean, some of that, as perhaps some of us may know, are sort of demanded or guided by the realities of life, where one has to go from one job to another job and have different roles and capacities. But the other sort of dimension is some degree of freedom that one has to explore art as a medium of social transformation, and all of that. So, well, we have some materials that we can share of yours that would be great to see and hear more about from you. But sort of pulling some more things out of our experiences from the past and their relevancy today. Do you feel that, like the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter, campaigns and movement are in a kind of position now or state of vibrancy that will not go away? Are we in a state of, social transformation in the United States that is sort of this lopsided, out of sync, yet to be determined how it's going to come out kind of reality right now?
No, I mean, we have to recognize that the United States was founded on racism and genocide. And so, this is part of this great republic. This is now become institutionalized. And so to eradicate this is not going to be, because of a movement or a moment. Black Lives Matter, it was at this cavalcade, this perfect storm of events that forced us into acknowledging what existed, which ultimately is the naked racial hypocrisy that exists. I mean, if it were not for the pandemic, would we be having a conversation about, Black Lives Matter and what Black Lives Matter was actually doing, and the diversity, if you will, for lack of a better expression, that the movement has taken on? No. I mean, the pandemic forced us into, which is consistent with any type of conflict or crisis. It often forces us to have conversations that we might otherwise not be willing to. The United States as a society, we have selective amnesia. We will, address things when we have no choice, when we have no escape, when we have no recourse. But the moment that we can actually find something else to distract us that is more palpable, that then allows us to say, oh yeah, I mean, there are homeless people, but wait, didn't we give $1? Yeah, we gave $1 last week to the American Red Cross. You mean there's still homeless people after that? Well, then we'll get to it later, because right now, there's the World Wrestling Federation. We got to watch that. So anything that we can allow ourselves to distract from the realities of our existence, so it doesn't get too close, the cognitive dissonance, we're going to jump to. But what happened was, as a result of March 13th, then young people who weren't subscribing to these delusions, these inequities that exist, and started going out and started marching and demonstrating, and then coming back and having conversations with their parents. And then their parents, part of them going, well, I'm concerned that, the police might do something, so I have to go out and protect my child. And now all of a sudden the parents are out there, walking shoulder to shoulder, and they're going, yeah, there is something wrong here. Or the flip is which was reminiscent of what happened in Northern Ireland, where 8-year-old, 9-year-old girls said to their fathers, I don't want that which I'm going to inherit. What are you going to do to change my future? And so here young people are saying, yes, Black lives do matter. And why are there these inequities? And what are you going to do to change it? And how does a parent look at their child in the eye and then continue a lie when you're looking into the future and they're having to be truthful with it? And as a result of, either, limited things on television or limited excuses or distractions, the parents were marching. And one of the most beautiful images that I saw was this 3-year-old, blonde, blue-eyed, standing in front of Barclays Center with her fist in the air and a note that was barely legible that said Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
My concern is, how do we take this moment, this movement, transition it into a mission, and transition that into policy and legislation? How do we then start owning this, what we've created, and also own what we possibly can create?
Gordon, as a man of color, do you use your color as a political tool at times?
Do I use my color as a political tool? My existence is political.
Tell me about that.
What's there to say?
What's been
in New York City, where, the intergenerational trauma is consistent. I mean, I wake up and go, well, I don't even need to leave my home and possibly can be shot in my bed. I don't have to go out of my apartment and commit a crime or be accused of committing a crime and potentially could end up dead. I mean, and how do I speak to a young person who says, the apathy leads to nihilism. And so when a young person goes, okay, well, what's the point? If I am a straight A student through high school and then I graduate and I can't get into the four-year college, not because of my grades, but because of affirmative action and because of all of these other, biases that prevent me from going to the school of my choice. Or let's say I do get in. Before I walk into that classroom or before I log into that classroom, I've already incurred a debt that I don't know if I'm going to be able to repay after 4 years. So 4 years, I graduate with a piece of paper that doesn't assure me of being able to get a job. But I am assured that I'm going to be in a debt that I may not be able to pay back. So how do I then encourage that person to have hope for the future? I hear chirp.
Yeah, in your films, right? You've taken a sort of advocacy position for a number of causes and issues. When we first met, I was watching a film presentation of yours at, I think it was the National Arts Club, and our friend Claire was there. But it was a project about what occurred at 9/11. Would you could you just talk a little bit about that for a moment and maybe give us an insight into your sort of sense of duty and purpose, taking on big scale projects and issues like that, and about recent work that you're doing, and then let's go into one of these sort of clips that we have to share from you. But please, for the moment, as an example.
Well, the intent was never to, necessarily, make grandiose films or, categorical statements or any of that. But, I was looking at the fact that, in 9/11, everyone you were in either one of two positions if you were in the media. Either you were in lockstep with the government and you were waving the patriotic flag, or you were some screaming Yahoo. You were some crazy, some radical. Neither of which I agreed to.
Yeah.
But I was concerned that, people were sick and dying and more would become so. And then I observed some of just the examples of pure, just racism, that was happening, where in some of the outlying areas of Bushwick in East New York, they're putting up signs that were all in Spanish. And the sign said, "It's your civic responsibility to come and help clean up Lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center. You will be paid up to $250 an hour, and we will pick you up, at this street on, Euclid and Liberty at 4 a.m. And so they would show up with these vans like migrant farmers, and you had, huge numbers of, primarily, Latin American individuals that were standing there. And they would get in these vans, and they weren't provided any personal protective equipment whatsoever. And they would get down to the World Trade Center, and they would then be brought into a trailer where they would be asked, do you have a social security number? And the person would say, no sé nada, no sé nada. And then they say, repeat after me. And they would give them some fictitious list of numbers, 9. And then they would send them off to go and clean up. And then, of course, first thing that happened within 3 days, 6 individuals asphyxiated and died, and their bodies were thrown in the back of these vans, never to be seen from. Individuals after, they was supposed to take up to two years to clean up the World Trade Center. They did the work in 6 months. Individuals would then show up to Mount Sinai and other hospitals with this cocktail effect of all of these illnesses. Because the illnesses were happening, it was supposed to really, they were showing up with mesothelioma, lymphoma, all of these different cancers that would usually take up to 20 years to develop. And they're showing up within, 6 months to a year having these effects. And so the medical industrial complex, in collusion with the government, made a benchmark that was, if your illnesses were not respiratory, then you had a pre-existing condition. And so, and I decided that I was going to document this. I wound up having documented one 14-year-old girl who was going to Stuyvesant High School who had 2 spinal taps. I managed to get to a number of other young people who, on average, 20 high school students were leaving Stuyvesant High School every week with nausea and nosebleeds and the like, all because, Senator Schumer's wife, who was the Department of Transportation head at that time, had, unbeknownst to her, parked the barges that, all of the toxic debris was loaded onto adjacent to Stuyvesant High School. And just out of circumstance, Stuyvesant High School, the air ducts were open. And so all of that debris was sucked in to the high school and dispersed itself throughout the locker rooms and the library and the auditorium. And so all these young people were getting sick. These young people didn't have to go, they didn't return to Stuyvesant High School until a week and a half later. But the students who were across the street at BMCC, who are primarily, individuals of color, they had to be to school 3 days after. These individuals, of course, were getting very sick.
Right.
And so I felt that, again, here's, it's about giving voice to the voiceless. It's about showing, this is what's happening and we can do better and we need to do better. And it's unacceptable that we don't. And we have to own our hypocrisy. And so that's why I decided to make that film. And we, had the great fortune, the National Arts Club, was, 100% behind it and did a number of huge private screenings, and the film continues to screen to this day.
Gordon, I think we could really take a moment to watch one of the recent works of yours, the one where you're reading a poem. Emily can screen share it, whatever it's called. And can you just tell us the title of that work, Gordon?
Well, it's no real title. It was for
Okay.
a fellowship that I just concluded with Encore and the Op-Ed project. So I've written a poem and I've done a lot of photography around what had been occurring in New York and throughout the country since last March.
Right. Okay. So here we go. And we're going to hear Gordon's voice and his very trained and skilled voiceover narration.
It's a compliment to the software. It has little to do with my training.
Yeah, well, you had a little something to do with it. How's it going, Em? Okay. There we go. Well, we're just taking a moment to find this material. I think Emily's using a new laptop that she's not entirely familiar with. Oh, are you okay? Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now, Gordon.
So I've been, as I mentioned, Encore, an op-ed project had helped contextualize a lot of the work that I've been doing around.
I'm sorry, here it comes.
A prayer for the living, for Paul Woods and the spirit of his family. The New York Times, 7/24/2020. On Thursday, Paul Woods was supposed to celebrate his 17th birthday. Instead, Mr. Woods' family and friends will gather for this funeral. The teenager was shot to death on Saturday night on a street corner in the Soundview section of the Bronx. At least half a dozen unarmed young people have been slain in the area in the last 2 years. 1. A ringing phone and a hushed voice breaks the quiet of a Sunday morning. They shot Michelle's son last night. He's dead. Impossible, I think. I must be in a nightmare. But the voice doesn't go away, and I'm awake and calling Michelle, offering words and thoughts of support and sorrow, words a mother ought never have to hear. It's too frightening to ask the necessary question, will this be another decade of dead children? So, we plan this funeral, this memorial, this teach-in, this burial, worrying throughout. There's no money to cover the cost. A friend asked, but how is a mother ever supposed to have such money? How is she supposed to plan for this expense? We'll have everything right here, Michelle says. In the community, she says. But it's the trenches she means, for this is a war zone, and we are all casualties, each one of us walking wounded, the scars seen and unseen. 2. For Paul Woods, taken at 16, for his mother and sister, for his brother and grandmother, for the girl he loved, for the baby he made, for the father he never knew nor touched, for all people of color who have buried their children as unprepared soldiers in this war. This war we did not ask for and cannot seem to escape. This war against black life, this war against black humanity, raging on mean streets called Story and Boynton. For all of those who have been taken before this day, for all of those who will not be saved tomorrow, for all of those whom no one remembers, nor whose spirits we honor, I submit this humble prayer in the name of the mothers and the fathers, the sons and the daughters, the brothers and the sisters, the friends and the lovers, to all of us still living from this day forward. May we walk forever in clarity that we shall never more confuse enemy from the friend, nor be organized into gangs against each other, nor place material before soul, nor participate in our own murders. May we walk forever in honor, because within us lies the reality of who we have been and who we might become. May we walk forever in strength, for strength is the legacy of the children of the people who survived the Middle Passage. May we walk forever with pride wherever we may travel, for our ancestors were founders, philosophers, and builders, and they willed us nothing less. May we walk finally and forever in peace amongst our people, with respect and dignity, despite our differences, for it is only us, as brothers and sisters, who can lead us through these darkest of days.
Stop screen sharing. Yeah. Okay. Gordon, we're very grateful for your having us share this in its full length today. And it comes to mind and embody very much the experience that Emily and I shared when we went to what I like to call George Floyd Plaza, the George Floyd Memorial Plaza, I like to call it in South Minneapolis. And you and I were in communication by phone at that time, just this past summer, a couple of times. And one of the most extraordinary qualities about this was the sort of expansion of this horrific act and expression of institutionalized racism was the amazing community and what they did with that tragedy. They turned that entire neighborhood into what's called an autonomous zone. it became a sanctuary place and a completely sort of consciously curated environment that almost took suffering and sanctuary as a kind of tool for social transformation and, in a way, cultural activism, you could say. And I thought it's just so powerful to be in that space, realizing that, this event had catalyzed a tsunami of worldwide activism. So, your work certainly is one of the rays of light and faith and reverence and eulogy. So again, thanks so much for that. And what is it that you feel happens when we watch a film like that? How is it that film becomes a medium or communication tool for engagement and hopefully some motivation for a desired outcome socially?
I mean, hopefully the film, the filmmaker, dare I say myself, will serve to stand in relationship to your dreams, because we've stood in relationship to your nightmares for far too long. And so, it's always interesting to me to note that individuals, one, that, privilege has the luxury of forgetfulness, and those who are subjugated never forget.
Well, they're living it, right? They're living.
It's also interesting to note that, some of the most humane, or not humane, but some individuals who display a level of humanity are often those who have been so greatly oppressed. I'm thinking now of Haiti, where I know if you go into Port-au-Prince, the most impoverished nation in this hemisphere, an individual will give you their shirt off their back. That's all they have. What does that say? What does that say when these individuals who have nothing are willing to give all that they have?
Well, Gordon, if we empower those who have been oppressed and victimized, marginalized, if they're empowered with an education, a capacity to intervene in the social and political system, their experience informs how society could be and should be shaped.
Theoretically.
Sorry?
Theoretically.
What aspect is theoretical?
Informing, that you're going to empower them with education. I think that it's more about making sure that there's a level playing field, that individuals have equal access.
So I'm not sure what the contradiction was in what I said.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not being contradictory. I'm just suggesting that, oftentimes, a person will say, well, I'm going to share this with you. I'm going to give you something, but it's not going to be an equal amount. It's going to be, I'm going to dole out a little bit and feel that I've made some steps forward, so that I feel better about myself, as opposed to really being conscious of what this individual needs and being able to share in an equitable and just manner. It's not, I don't want you to, give me a fish. I want the person to learn how to fish. I want the person to have access to the water in which they can go and fish. I want them to have access I want them to be allowed to self-determine how they want to live and how they'll be able to live.
Well, in the case of, let's say, the Jews and the Holocaust and Germany's responsibility for this, they were made retributions, right? I mean, like billions of dollars. That never happened in this country, in America, not to the Native Americans, not to your ancestors, not to my ancestors, the Italian Americans who came
Well, let's look at
we're living in a space of capitalistic exploitation and opportunism.
John. I mean, realistically, when you talk about, and you're mentioning a financial retribution, I mean, let's just look at this. Let's just examine this, okay? Retribution to Native Americans for what is for the genocide that has taken place in this country. Is that ever going to happen? Please. Retribution to, for 400 years of forced servitude, of slavery. I mean, we're not going to be able to adequately financially compensate Henrietta Lacks's family, which, the economic numbers are that financial restitution to Henrietta Lacks's family would be $3 trillion. And that's one individual.
So with your wisdom and experience, Gordon, how do we level the playing field?
How do we level the playing field? Well, it's more than, I think that it can't be something as simple as Australia, when they acknowledged and they said, we apologize to the Aborigines, but that's all that they said. That's all that was done. Okay. It's going to take a lot of work, and I am pragmatically optimistic. I believe that things will change, but unfortunately, I think that they're going to have to get much worse. They have to get to a place where it becomes painful, where you're forced into acknowledging and then taking action. It's not enough to say that these inequities exist. It's about, and oddly enough, I mean, within the next 15 years, the United States is going to be a majority country anyway. What happens when individuals of color are actually the majority politically? What does that look like? And is that going to be, is the result going to be more extreme groups taking even further crazy, craven acts? I don't know. I mean, I'm concerned about, neoliberals who are thinking, okay, well, maybe if we give a little, then we won't have to address a lot of these issues further.
Right.
These are concerns that I have. And, I'm continuing to make films that address these concerns, and understand, filmmaking is just one aspect, because, in all of the films that I make and that I continue to attempt to make, the film is the messenger. It's not the message. I don't get this shit twisted. Excuse my language. It really isn't. But it's how do we sustain a discourse around the particular topics and issues. So film is one that I do. I'm involved with a group of some 60 architects, where we're helping architects recognize that it's not an us and them, but rechanging the language and how they're perceived as architects. Too often they're seen as, part of the problem. They're parachuting into a community, and the result is the community is going to be gentrified and people who live there are going to be forced out. So how do we change those dynamics? I'm working with a group of progressive, politically conscious African-American men that are really, saying, what are we doing? What is our role in relationship to our communities, in relationship to our family, in relationship to this society? And some other things that I'm doing, as I mentioned, obviously Encore, it's, seminal work on the importance of intergenerational interactions with our aging population to improve the quality of life of our aging. And what does that look like? So I'm, to the best of my ability, engaging in as many different areas, not overtaxing myself, but making sure that the work that I do is value creating and is tangential. Someone can actually fully experience it and recognize it and own it. And lastly, and I think this is of critical importance for me personally, it's engaging the youth as a vehicle for their own recognition of their identity and allowing them to awaken and stand up and start assuming the mantle as a conscious, proactively engaged young person capable of making decisions and of helping change or right this ship that has been far off course for far too long.
We're looking for a clip, Gordon, of the dialysis project that you're working on. Can you find it, Emily? Okay. So Emily, by the way, is just over here in the room next to me. Going to run this, Gordon, without sound.
We go.
do you mind telling us a little bit about what this story is and your approach to, advocating?
Sure. I mean, the interesting thing about this particular film in relationship to where we are, because there have been a lot of questions as to why, communities of color are ambivalent or apprehensive about going and getting vaccinated. It's interesting that, apparently it's purported that you can get vaccinated, but yet individuals still can't get tested. But I started making this film in 2010, where I was looking at end-stage renal disease, dialysis, and organ transplantation. And I approached it trying to be, non-polarizing, if you will, for lack of a better expression. And excuse me. And I then wound up going down this rabbit hole and ended up at one point with 24 whistleblowers. The film, had the great good fortune of being selected as one of 7 films to participate in UC Berkeley's investigative reporting program, where I had, such amazing mentors. Lowell Bergman, Dawn Porter were among the 5 mentors that we had. And they championed the film to Tom Jennings, who then championed the film to be brought to Frontline. We're still in that conversation. The challenge has been, how do we, allow these whistleblowers to participate and to get the film out, and at the same time protect the anonymity of the whistleblowers. I'll stop by saying one thing that is really, I think, important and salient, is that we discovered that over 100,000 African Americans had been killed over a 10-year period by the overuse of a drug, with the knowledge of CMS, which is Medicaid, Medicare, Fresenius and DaVita, all participated in this. And this is not historical. This is post, post Tuskegee. This is something that occurred between 2002 and 2012. So unfortunately, a lot of these concerns that we have about, the medical, again, industrial complex in this country, are real. They are palpable, and they are continuing to occur.
Gordon, I just want to let people know that anyone who's been joining the meeting a later time in our session tonight can watch the beginning of this recording on Facebook and YouTube, and eventually in a few days from our website. So thanks everyone for your comments that are coming in, and we'll be able to address your comments with Gordon in just a few minutes. Gordon, without wanting to sound or appear naive, although I know I am naive to some extent, do you think that some kind of a program that can empower people in diverse communities with skills of activism or cultural activism can be useful for leveraging this sort of goal or wish, demand for an equal playing field? Do you think that activism as a vehicle can be useful in diverse communities, and then perhaps finally as a kind of synergy of communities? I've seen, for example, a friend of ours very involved with the Wide Awakes, which was a really amazing multicultural event this past October, Tracy Ryans, and sort of turned us on to this. So I just curious about your perspective on that. I know you're our good friend, and we love you very much, and you come on this program frequently. What is your sort of attitude or philosophy and pragmatic idea about this idea of activating communities in a sort of informed and skillful way to intervene, to disrupt, to remake, in a sense, our social structures?
Well, I mean, I believe that, I know that these examples exist.
And some of your mentors, perhaps you might, and examples of other institutions, or bring in a couple of references, perhaps, if you don't mind.
Certainly. I mean, as I said, I believe that these examples, I mean, these organizations exist. They don't get the type of attention or recognition because, you're never alone if you're negative. You're always going to have someone or something supporting your negativity. And journalistically speaking, what bleeds leads. So we're not going to show the positive. We're going to show those things that are getting the attention, that allow us to, not say that I can actually be the change agent that I seek. And I can also reference historically, the United States and New York City, arguably being a microcosm, although it seems more like Oz in comparison to the rest of the country. Pasadena notwithstanding, but New York City is an amalgam, and arguably is the United States, and our diversity is our strength. And I remember, as I mentioned earlier, Bella Abzug, and I mentioned David Rothenberg, and the relationship between Blacks and Jews in New York City, and what that meant, Blacks and Jews in this country, and helping achieve, the monochrome of success that we achieved in during the civil rights movement. So we came together, and it wasn't because, we had an administration that said we're going to do this or we need to do this.
Right.
Yeah. And so I suggest that, we can, and we do, and we need to. And we're being forced to because young people are saying they're demanding it of us. And we don't have any escapes. We can't, we can't go and watch a baseball game. I mean, we can, but that's kind of silly. But we can't, revert to the usual things that allow for distraction and deflection and moving past, that which is omnipresent. So, I think that, it is of critical importance that we start not just sitting down and talking to a young person, but asking them, what do you think? And how do we bring into reality what you think? You think that we need to do this? Okay, so what can we do to make that happen? And how can your thoughts and notions work in concert with someone who is much, much older than you? How do we start having a conversation, and how do we start enacting, these notions into being manifest? So, that may not have fully answered your question, but I do want to say that these examples are here. We just have to search, or we have to look. We can't settle for, your network news. You can't, you need to look at Democracy Now! You need to look at Laura Flanders. You need to look at Truth Dig. You can't settle for what is given. And I mean, I think that in and of itself, if you leave here with anything, know that there are those who are actively working at making a change in this society right here, right now, and you can be one of them. My role is not to tell you necessarily where it is. I can offer suggestions, but I am to tell you that, yes, we can continue to make a change. We do not have to settle for all that is given, because there's more to it than what meets the eye.
I recall, Gordon, you were sharing with Emily and I not too long ago, one of your experiences at the Lincoln Center, as a artist in residence, and the kind of scholarship and instruction that you received, that everyone there perhaps may have hopefully learned from, in terms of our programmed perception of things, our conditioned responses, and such. Do you mind giving us telling us a story or some anecdote that was meaningful to you, that you take with you, into a mediation or into a meeting or into, brainstorming a project?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you two, and then I will. I'll tell you one, and then I'll give a shout out to someone who also who's provided another example of that. So the work was through Lincoln Center Institute, the founder of which was Maxine Green. She's passed away roughly 8 years ago. I encountered her both up at Teachers College and then when I became a fellow of Lincoln Center Institute. She created this educational modality which is called aesthetic education, here meaning utilizing a person's experiences as the entry to new work. The beauty of this particular approach is it levels the playing field where teachers are no longer ensconced as objects of veneration or vilification, but they become partners in the learning process. Too often that is viewed as being one where if the teacher were to reveal her humanity, then she or he loses authority or control over their classroom, and nothing can be further than the truth. Fortunately, that was proved evident. An example of which I was way out in bumfuck Idaho or the dregs of New York City as a theater teaching artist, and I got a phone call from Lincoln Center asking if I could cover a music class. And I said, well, while I played certain instruments, I didn't, I'm not a professional. That's not what I do. They said, look, either you want to do it or you don't. We don't have time for this. So I said, okay, why not? To check. So and it was also an opportunity to really check and really test whether or not this actually worked. So I went into this classroom, and this was, of course, a typical 36 student class size. And the teacher, I said to him, well, here I'm going to cover, for the music TA, and what is your class? What do you teach? He's like, well, it's a science class. I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to figure this one out. I said, look, this is what I'm gonna do. And he's like, well, look, I've got some paperwork to do in the back of the room. And he pulls up, the newspaper, but it's upside down. I'm like, I said, well, I regret to inform you, which is what I also should have said to everybody as you entered this room, that, this is, this is amazing. This is welcome. You're all on board the Titanic. This is a doomed voyage. You're all on steerage class, so you can't dive overboard. And I told him that. And he's like, look, man, I've been here. I've got 19.6 in, meaning I've been here 19 years and 6 months. At the end of the semester, I'm out. I'm good. It doesn't, do whatever you want. And I said, no, partner, it doesn't work like that. If I'm going to get, as John suggested, if I'm going to get tomatoes thrown at, I'm not going to be the only one. I'm not going to be the last one who gets hit with one. So kids come in, and then I, said to them, look, we're going to do a shuttle mission. And we pulled out his boombox, and I immediately threw on rap and hardcore hip hop because that's what they know. And during that, we then started selecting the 9, out of the 36 that were going to be the astronauts on this mission. And we brought up a couple of other kids to help us select those 9. And then I went from rap and hip hop into R&B. And then we had them dancing. And now we're putting them through training and exercises. And so they're then going, going through different stations, and we're having them do everything. And at which point we then tell them, okay, now we're ready for liftoff. And so I then went from, R&B, and I then used Duke Ellington's Take the A Train, arguably cliche, but again, jazz was something intuitively that they knew. And then the moment that they achieved orbit, I informed them that I'm now going to I first asked them what orbit was. Their response was, well, orbit was when, Raheem was diving out of the way of the bullet. I said, well, arguably, there's something there, but we're not talking about that. We're talking a little higher up in the atmosphere. But now I'm going to introduce you to some other music, which was Host the Planets. And I explained to them that when Host composed this music in 1921, there were only 7 planets, And I looked at my watch. It was an hour and 40 minutes. I'm like, okay, 5 minutes and I'm out. I'm good. I got this covered. So I said to him, so your homework responsibility is going to be that you're going to have to come up with the topography, the governance, the people, everything about these 2 remaining planets. How do they coexist? What is it about? And then, Bell rang. I'm like, good. Okay, I got this one. Whatever. I'm out. 2 weeks later, I come back to the school to do my regular class, and the principal meets me, which, if you know New York City schools, you never see the principal. You see the AP. So I'm going, okay, what did I do? And I'm thinking, like, I mean, I know for certain I checked her license. She's 18. So it wasn't that, I'm and there's nothing I could have done that was felonious. So he brings me to the classroom, and then I see to my amazement that these students, not only did they create those two planets, but then they taught it to their siblings. They taught it to their entire grade. They had pictures up of the planets and what the people look like. They took the music and they did this mashup. And this is less about me as a teaching artist, and it's more about the efficacy of the work. And it's also more about dialogue. Ultimately, that's the point. The ability to communicate. And how do we use our ability to communicate to transcend all of those imposed barriers or those boundaries that we create of orientation, of race, class, gender. And I think that, if we're able to engage someone and honor and respect and, have them share their experiences, then we can start having a dialogue and creating a level of commonality that can actually move us past all of these barriers that we've created. And so that was, that's the antidote, if you will. The other thing that I really want to share, and I've already shouted out Susan and I shouted out Robin, and I didn't, give a nod, and I gave a nod to Stephen and Bobby, and Jesse and all of you who are here. But I do want to say something, and this I think is really important to me. And I didn't ask him to come on the call because I was bored and I figured that he didn't have anything to do. But this gentleman would go about explaining, the Jewish experience in a way that was, I understand. I worked for the Anti-Defamation League, at one point in my life. I've been to Israel 3 times. But he would explain the Jewish experience from the standpoint of saying, this is, I don't want you to be subjected to my pain. I want you to be able to share in the experience and bring your own experience. And, he wrote several books, Last Dance at Hotel Kempinski, as yes, sir, yes. I probably pronounced it incorrectly. He'll probably correct me. But I thought that was so important, and that has left such an impression on me. And even if he weren't here, I'd still say it, because it allowed me to then start engaging. I think that, and that's the whole point here, film or whatever your artistry is, to use it as a vehicle to have a sustained discourse with someone different from you. That's the challenge. How willing are you to have a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you, or whose opinions are so diametrically opposite, but that you're then able to share and understand and hear and listen and then communicate. And that's what will bring about the healing that we want. And I can honestly say that a lot of young people, they're doing that. They're not caught up with the fact that there's, the alphabet soup of orientation of A, B, C, D, LGBTQ, trans, whatever you are today.
Right.
They're saying this is a person, and this is a person that I can relate to and that I'm a friend of. The question is, are we able to do the same?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier in the show, the danger is how you exist in someone else's imagination.
Well, the danger for me is existing in your imagination. Yes.
In mine, personal imagination.
Well, someone who looks like you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks a lot.
Oh, well, don't mention.
I'll pray for them too. But, Gordon, there is some interface, some mechanism or manner in which a method to have this sort of direct perception and clear perception of others other than ourselves. And I know you're a meditator and you work in this other space, but what kind of is there a tool that you could reference that I mean, you did reference this one lesson in class, but some tool that suspends, our projected sense of an image, self-image, and the projection onto the outside world through our very prejudiced lenses. Is there a way to, how do we get off the hook from this pattern? Is there some tool that you've learned that you can, sort of give us an insight for you? You've had that great experience with the Lincoln Center program, and you've been meditating for a long, long time, as long as I've known you.
Well, I've been practicing for 36 years at being a Buddhist, and every other day or so, I actually am one. But as I said, I was always concerned about being a member of any organization that would have me as a member. But I've been a member of the Soka Gakkai International, and so I do chant. That is my spiritual belief, but it's not. But at the same time, it's not to advocate that everybody should be practicing Buddhism. That's not the point. Even within our practices, it's about dialogue. It's about communication. And, I think that, as mentioned, or as I referenced earlier, the importance is, to help others tap into their own artistry, and whatever that is, not necessarily dance or music or ping pong. I mean, it could be garbage collection. It could be whatever is your raison d'etre that gives life meaning for you. And to be able to have that person experience that and to help encourage and honor that, and at any age. I mean, the fountain of youth is that. I mean, most of the individuals that I have had this amazing fortune of interacting with that are in their 90s, who are like, look, Gordon, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm real busy. I got things to do. I'm like, well, you're 93 years old. What do you got to do? What do you mean? What do I have to do? And and they are more busy than Zelda Kaplan, who you and I discussed a long time ago. Zelda would tell me, Gordon, look, don't call me before two, and I'm like, 2. I'm not calling anybody 2 in the morning. 2 in the afternoon. I'm like, okay, and don't call me before 6 in the morning. And I'm like, well, I don't call anybody before 6 in the morning. So don't call you between 6 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Why? Because I'm sleeping. Well, what were you doing? And I didn't need to ask her what she was doing because I would see her. Woman was at clubs and closing them down at 90 years old. I mean, you don't believe me? Look at the New York Times, magazine that did a whole spread on her. So I share that to say that, again, she and so many others were just continuing this zest, this zeal for life. And, a friend of mine I referenced earlier, Susan, who's on the line, Susan Pearlstein. I mean, Susan, after 42 years, or rather 40 years of running Elder Share the Arts, closes it, figured, okay, what's she going to do? She's going to probably go and hang out. No, of course, she starts another foundation. It's like, wait a second. I'm not going to mention his name anymore, but a person told me, this restaurateur, how do you make $10 million in the restaurant business? Actually, he said, how do you make $1 million in the restaurant business? And I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, you start with 10 million. But yet, in spite of that, he continued to, be engaged. Wait a second, closed his restaurant after 42 years, and what does he do? He has a podcast. It's like, dude, don't you have something? Yeah, I have plenty of other things to do. So I think, it's long-winded to say that it's, how do we, seek for ourselves? How do we continue to be, excited by life? And no one can do that, chanting, meditating, going to the mountaintop, hanging out with Buddha, hanging out with the Dalai Lama, who's incredible to hang out with, but hanging out with any of these people, they can't do it for you. They can't make you happy. You have to make the determination to be happy. And it's, if anything is sacrosanct, it's this. because in your determining to be happy, it gives license to others to do the same.
Aye, contagious.
It needs to be. It better be. Otherwise, you have the wrong form of happiness.
Well, that's what we're trying to resonate this kind of happiness through the tuning fork, perhaps a little bit. But we have a bunch of, really engaged comments here, and I wonder if people don't mind, instead of my reading these comments, for example, could you guys all verbally comment by turning off your microphones first, and I'll just name a few people. Please be ready, if you don't mind, to ask these questions or comments yourself. And Bobby Gonzalez says something about leveling the playing field. Ron Daniels in Mackinac, UP, about reconciliation as a tool, inherently flawed. Nikki Ledger, if you're still here, the Turks never compensated the Armenians, right? And Sharon had to leave the meeting at 5. So please, if you don't mind, friends, oh, and there's Susan. Hi, Susan, nice to see you there. We've all had this extraordinary opportunity, looking at Susan's backdrop there, to inhabit our own domiciles quite a bit in the last year. And, we're very, very lucky that we can really have this time to be together. So thanks for everyone's participation again. And
why don't we start with Bobby and move through the list that you named?
Thank you. Bobby, you going to say hi?
Hi. Hi, John. Hi, Gordon. Good to
Hi.
see you. Yeah, so John, when you had mentioned about leveling the field, giving Black people an education, I think that would help, but I don't think it's the primary way to level the field. I think there needs to be some accountability where from the privilege as well as allyship, knowing that Black people, Indigenous peoples, other people of color, like I'm Hispanic, come into this life from scratch. And that accountability can be actually what Gordon was talking about, which is, being mindful and sharing joy. Like, I have this privilege, and it's not financial privilege. It's, hey, let me share my platform with you.
Right.
Let's listen to your stories.
What are you doing, Bobby? What is your activity these days, and how are things going?
What do I do in my life?
Yeah.
Well, actually, Gordon wrote a letter of recommendation for me. I'm a full-time student at Bard College. I'm part of a program that has helped adults whose college degree was in
Hyphenated,
didn't happen, interrupted. And I have a full scholarship at Bard until I get my college degree. And I'm old enough to be most of the students' mother. So as far as Gordon talking about the youth, I'm taking human rights courses, and I really do get to hear what they want and what they need. And they have strong opinions and values, and it's a mix. It's beautiful.
Bobby, are you on campus up in near Tivoli and Bard, or are you down here in the city?
I live in Rhine Cliff, so I'm close to campus.
Right.
I'm Zooming, but I start an on-campus course in a few weeks because of COVID.
Yeah. Well, Emily and I are very often just a few miles away from Bard, and maybe we'll be able to get in touch with you sometime.
You can get my information from your speaker here.
he also has an underage adult who is informing life hourly.
Yeah.
Her daughter.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So nice to meet you
Thank you. Nice to meet you too, John.
under these very favorable circumstances, I might add. So let's see. Sally Harris commented about your show, the first clip that we showed, Gordon. I don't know if Sally wants to say hi, but that's Emily's mom there at this moment in North Carolina. Hi, Sally. There you go.
Hi, I just wanted to say that it was a beautiful film with a lovely wish for our future. And I also want to say that Gordon knows how to stage himself for a Zoom meeting. He is beautiful.
Well, we need to get a mini course on that, Sally. I'm feeling really embarrassed. And intimidated, not by Gordon's, sort of aesthetics, but more by the lack of time we have to spend with him. That's really too bad. But thanks, Sally and Gordon.
I'm not sure, was Susan on the queue for a question, or she does have a question, but you're muted, Susan.
Oh, Susan, there you go.
There's also Stephen Williams.
And Stephen, yeah.
Gordon, thanks so much. This is fabulous. And I loved what you did in honoring in the video that you showed. It's so important that we honor that one generation stands on the shoulders of the one that came before. And by having all those kids by showing people across the generations and having the young voices there, I felt you just honored that. And we know that one generation learns from the next and interprets things as they will. And so we go from, the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and each generation learns from the one that came before and, steps up to the moment. And so I just thought that the video did that, and I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would not have, it's so funny because Susan and I took a meeting with Encore because I've been making this film about intergenerational interactions and the importance of art inclusion, based upon Susan's seminal work with Elder Share the Arts. And in the meeting, they said, Marcy, who couldn't be on the call, but, sends her love, said, so Gordon, you're going to apply for the Encore Fellowship. And I look at Susan, and Susan, of course, is going, yeah, you are. And so I applied, not thinking I would get it. I was like, okay, well, I got to, but, whatever. And I apply. And then what happens is I was selected as one of the 20 people that were part of that 219, the second cohort with Encore op-ed. But I can, we didn't show it today, but I've been working on this film based upon Susan's seminal work, of Elder Share the Arts, and really the importance, as she said,
grab that, Elder Shares the Arts, yeah.
Right. For us to really appreciate where we've come from, appreciate where we are, and own where we're going.
Exactly.
I'll be back up in the Berkshires soon.
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make is that I think what helps connect us across generations, across all of our differences, is our curiosity about people. And Gordon, you have an insatiable curiosity. But I think that is what actually, when you do cultural work and you work across generations and all that, it's that curiosity about one another that enables us to overcome our differences. So
Yes. Thank you.
thank you.
We have mentioned, you have an interloper who's in from the West Coast. Steve Williams.
Yes. Well, thank you for this. This is really, for the invitation, Gordon. This is really great. And it allows me to bridge that East Coast, West Coast sort of thing. But I always love it because the community on the East Coast is so powerful to me. And one of the things that I just wanted to bring up was this issue about imagery, right? In art. California, we have a huge problem because art does not exist in our schools anymore. And I think the ability to create self-images, the ability to juxtapose our images with other things really defines how we see the world. And I'm just wondering about that, you know. I think about that in terms of recently what happened with the 1619 project and also the 1776 project, how the battle over who wants to define the history and the images of what we're supposed to be, and how much going forward that we can take charge of that and be the truth tellers. So.
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Steve, and I'm definitely, you know, Steve and I are part of, you know, this organization, the D Word, which is a group of some 19,000 documentarians globally, you know, the majority of which exist outside of New York. Yeah, the 1619 project, you know, juxtaposed to, you know, 1776 project. But I would submit to you humbly that, you know, and I do a lot of work in media literacy. And so, you know, the images are there, you know, and the kids, young people see them, they create their own, okay? We often, you know, will have critical thinking as first semester, first year course. But people are thinking critically at 5 years old, okay? So we really need to start flipping that narrative of saying, no, you can't, you know, start making critical assessments of your environment until you're 18. You know, you can't start making work that is in relationship or response to that which is out there until you're this age. And that's why, you know, I go back to how we engage in conversation with young people. The reason that it doesn't happen is because we're fearful of what will happen. You know, if you don't want to see what you look, you know, 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds are the most honest, you know, ask, you know, a 4-year-old tells you you're ugly. Yeah, believe them. Okay. You know, I usually tell them when they say I'm ugly, it's like, well, don't worry, it'll pass. And trust me, you're even uglier. But now we're having a conversation about aesthetics, right? But what's important about that is we're having a conversation. And so then start asking this young person, well, what did you see today? I want you to write it. I want you to paint it. What did it smell like? What did it taste like? Why didn't you like it? You didn't like it because your friend said not to like it? But did you really like it? Or did you not like this person? Why did you not? So really start engaging. And we don't engage because of fear of how it will come back and be a reflection on us. And it's not necessarily so. And if it is, even a better opportunity to start having that conversation. But I had mentioned it earlier, and I'm not a psychologist, but cognitive dissonance. We don't want to address those things in front of us for fear of how it will be a reflection of us. And if you're fearful of that, well, you know, get over your fear and start working through it.
Gordon, if you don't mind, we're going to run a few moments from your film about the elderly. And while Susan is still with us, perhaps you might just tell us a little bit about the project. So here's the screen share on that, and then a comment, I think, from Ron Daniels in Mackinac.
Wait, hold on. Would you like me to make a comment about creative aging?
I would, Susan.
Oh, okay. Here we go. So the film was made to look at all the different projects that are going on in terms of engaging elders in a creative way and giving back to generations, because so many older people are longing for a connection to the future, and that lies with young people. And so, for example, the mission of Elders Share the Arts was to link cultures and generations through the arts, through dance, theater, music, writing, poetry. As well, it was we engage and set up many projects that are called living history projects, where older people are interviewed and their stories are transformed into an art form in order to give it back to community. The whole purpose is to build community, to get to understand and know each other better, and to actually learn something new. Because there's a landmark study called the Creative Aging Study. And in that study, what was discovered was that if you learn something new and you make a new friend, then your health improves, because older people tend to get isolated, lonely, depressed. Of course, now we all are, but this was something that was really central to what was happening to older Americans in this country. And so it just to be able to link those cultures and generations is what keeps us as a healthy, really a healthy, vibrant community. There it is.
Thank you for your invigorating narration there, Susan. Really, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah. Just a shout out to Ron Daniels in Mackinac. You made a comment earlier, Ron. Please introduce yourself to our friend Gordon, and one day maybe we'll get Gordon to come out for the Sundance event.
Yes, I hope you passed the invitation to Gordon for me. Hello, Gordon. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Ron.
I'm a Odawa, but I was raised white. Raised told I was Cossack and French, because I live the very the same things that African communities are going through. The Native communities went through the same thing here. We had to actually leave and move away, like thousands of miles away, so they wouldn't take us from our mothers, because she could get a parking ticket and they could take you away and put you in a Catholic school and try to convert you, And so this talk of reconciliation, I see the government's doing, the Canadian governments are talking about it, our politicians, it's to me, it's such a false statement, because they're assuming that we agree on our past history. They won't even have that conversation. So they're trying to come to an agreement that's palatable for all of us, but yet we haven't even agreed on the past history, So we're going to come to an agreement. We're going to forget about what we did back then. Let's just ignore that. That was then, this is now. But the whole premise of, even saying that word, leads us nowhere. It just kicks the can down the street for our next generations. I've had to go through this whole thing. I admit I was a racist. I was a Republican, I was a Democrat, and I grew up through all this stuff. My grandfathers, and when I was a little boy, would hand me a beer and a cigarette. I was 8 years old. Here's, you might as well start now. And I watched all this violence, and this family violence grow up, and I think that the most important thing that we can do, you spoke about, working on the self, and that's what I strive to do now in a spiritual manner. And the first thing that came to my mind was, I can remember my brother get in trouble. We'd line us all up. We all got the belt, because we didn't stop him from doing something, whatever it was. And when I became a father, I was like, somewhere along the line, we have to break this cycle of generational trauma that we just keep re-imprinting on our children, and we encourage alcoholism and war and all this stuff and everything that we see on our TVs and all that, So I think that the only hope is, like you said, through the individual, and through this finding our own spirit and listening to our spiritual voice and not the voice in our head. It can only regurgitate. It doesn't, whatever we've been taught and fed and eaten and spit out, it's only once we find a way to shut that off and let our spirit come in and guide us, this is how we're going to change the world collectively. It comes from the individuals. I don't think there's any mandate, any laws that can be written, anything like that will change anything. And I truly believe, I'm a sun dancer, and I associate with a lot of people who are Buddhists and Shintos and Hindus, Islamic friends. You know, we all kind of, when we speak, we come to the very same conclusion. We all recognize that we've all been lied to by these borders and walls and fences, and that as individuals, we're all exactly the same. You know, there's nothing that makes us different when we look at each other under a spiritual level. So I appreciate your work. It's nice to meet you, Gordon.
Thank you.
I
You too.
really appreciate what you're doing there. It's beautiful, and I hope that you can make it up to participate with us. We're working on a film ourselves called Mwanda G, and the premise of the film is because we remember our future. We believe that in from a spiritual standpoint, if we see our future the way we want it, then we're actually creating it and we're living it at the same time. It's not something that anyone else can do for us. We have to do it for ourselves individually. You know, we got a controversial book coming out, and we're going to turn everybody on their heads because it's, you know, everything that we've been taught is all lies. They've just lied to us about everything, and it's time for the truth. And this is how we change the world, by sharing the truth and being caring about each other. I appreciate you, Gordon. John, thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Yep.
Blessing, Ron, as always. Well, Gordon, 5:37 over here in New York. And is there something else that you would like to sort of tell us or share? Or
Well, so I had a member of the educational team for Reframe Media, which is my company, Renee, who's in from Tennessee. We won't hold that against her. You know, Jesse, who is working with me on this intergenerational project, quite a formidable filmmaker in his own right. Hey, Renee. And
Hi. You just don't like that I'm getting out of the snow.
very, very mint from Memphis. But I wanted to ask, you know, Sir Hirsch if he had any comments or anything he wanted to say, you know, being that, you know, Cornelia Street is still in exile. So I wanted to give a shout out from Park Slope.
Well, that's very sweet of you, and thank you very much for your mentioning me in two different guises, as it were, and outing me in my various capacities. No, first of all, this was terrific. And secondly, I have some stuff that I want to talk to you about, which, no, it's nothing. It's nothing dramatic, but oddly enough, I'm now hyperventilating, so bear with me. I don't usually commit poetry. I mean, except for a book that I wrote with my kids. But what has moved me to poetry recently, of all things, is politics. And I think that there's probably some kind of unrecognized and unimagined impulse that we all have. And in some ways, I think one has to be open and relaxed enough to suddenly find one in a particular direction. And for reasons that I certainly cannot hope to explain, but certainly the last 4 years, which shall be nameless, have sort of produced some real, it's moved me to address it in a form that I never expected. And I think it's sort of wonderfully encouraging to see the kind of work that you are doing. And it's obviously not, you are expressing yourself in film, but also an awful lot goes into that, and an awful lot of your own very specific background manifests itself in all these different ways. And it's admirable, and thank you. And now I have to shut up. Mute.
Robin, I just wanted to reference a little bit of some of our collective knowledge over the last 6 months with our program. And that is something to do with the creative process in its sort of correlation with trauma, oppression, life-threatening circumstances, where is it perhaps the life force itself that sort of prioritizes a way of expression that is profoundly rooted in the life stream of, the universe, and it somehow comes moving through us unobstructedly, sometimes under these very oppressive and times of, in some cases, contraction and anxiety. The priorities come out, values come out, creative expression comes out, and I think, in a way, this show and our program is an expression of this almost generic social collective power. Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, and I didn't.
No,
I know
cool.
we're about to get off, but I just wanted to, share two quick things, and that is, one, the importance, again, is, what we're looking at is this intergenerational trauma, and so how do we mitigate that, and I mean, I definitely believe that, and it's better to build strong children, than to repair broken men. And oftentimes I will say that, I'm not broken, but I am pretty fucking dented. But I think that it's really, excuse the, the colloquialism there, but I think that it's really important that we start really owning this, because, what's at stake? We're one to really celebrate all the things that make us quote unquote great. Okay. But we don't want to celebrate the things that don't, we don't want to own the fact that it wasn't Trump, but it was everything that, the machinations that gave rise to him coming into existence. So now we want to forget those last 4 years, and that's fine. That's a choice. But what does it mean about the future moving forward? And unless we start repairing and we start building strong young people, then, we are destined to repeat this, which was such an abomination to all that is humane, all that is civil. We're destined to repeat it, and that's a responsibility that each and every one of us has, regardless if we have children. It's how do we engage? How do we have a sustained discourse with someone, impart some wisdom, and receive some sage wisdom from somebody younger than us, in a way that will bring about a healing and a holisticness, if you will, as we move forward. So, I mean, I've spoken a lot. I really appreciate your, giving audience and giving opportunity. Hopefully some of the things that I shared were my own opinions. And if they have some value, that's great. That's tremendous. And if they don't, then just discard them like you the last 4 years, and we'll move forward.
Thank you. A comment from Jesse Ash. Amen. Learn from our past.
That is a soon to be father.
So, well, getting ready for the next lesson.
There you go.
Thank you, Gordon. And we really embrace all of you. Emily and I are enriched so much by this evening. As always, we want you all to come back again soon. And Gordon, let's get some Italian food down on Court Street next week.
We'll make it happen. Thank you, guys.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Nice to meet you, man.
Thank
guys have a
you.
great-
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.